Now, AI is one of the dominant forces in the public space, and governments around the world are devising plans to promote the adoption of artificial intelligence, while at the same time they're coming up with regulations to limit AI's unintended and undesired use cases. In the following panel discussion, we will elaborate on how three major players are dealing with AI policy: China, the United States, and Europe. And I'm very happy that we will be joined by three distinguished guests. John Miller is Senior Vice President of Policy and General Counsel at the Information Technology Industry Council, ATI, which is basically the American Bitkom, if I may say so, and Professor Kristin Shi-Kupfer, a very distinguished China scholar and Professor for Contemporary China Studies at the University of Trier, and most importantly, my former boss. And Axel Voss is an influential member of the European Parliament. Now, Kristin, if I may start with you. Now, countries and especially governments and think tank pundits see technology issues in terms of being in a race with clear winners and clear losers. But when I look at how companies view these issues, they are frankly more concerned with being ahead of the competition, regardless whether this competition comes from China, India, Brazil, or any other country. Do you think the way, let's say, you pundits talk about these issues in terms of being in a race, is this race metaphor, do you think it's useful?
Yes, I do think actually it's very useful because basically a race is also about competition, as you just said. And I do think it's a very multi-dimensional metaphor actually because governments, like governments of China, the United States, and Europe, they compete on very different terms also. They have very different goals in that race. They offer different concepts because technology like AI is neutral, of course, but how you use them, for example, to provide political order or social stability, that's very different. So we have different competitors in that sense. And I mean, race is also interesting in that sense. Yes, it's about speed if we're talking about a short distance race. But if we talk about a longer run, you know, it's about perseverance and also how you actually run and how much the audience cheers you on. And I think that's also very much about. It's not only about being the fastest, but also if you can take on board, for example, your own societies and other countries, if they really feel attracted and inspired by the way you wanted to use that technology.
Mm-hmm. Right. And John, ATI is very engaged in the United States and beyond. And the United States is considered to be at the forefront of digitization and also, of course, at the forefront of artificial intelligence. Yet, I think that the US is now facing two competing forces. On the one hand, you have European protectionism, and the other hand, you have China catching up. So how are ATI's companies dealing with those two forces, and how do you judge the political response?
Well, thanks very much for the question, and also just want to thank Bitkom for the invitation today. Just to say a word about ITI, because I think it's important in answering this question. You know, as you mentioned, I mean, we are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but also have capitals in, we actually have offices in Brussels, Delhi, and also a presence in other capitals, including Beijing. And, you know, as a trade association representing the global technology industry, you know, we've got companies headquartered in all of these places as well. And so, you know, all of these companies are doing business globally, not only in the U.S., but Europe, China, and other key markets. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that, you know, looking at Europe and China and the U.S. together, that they are probably the three most consequential economic markets for global technology companies. And, you know, and frankly, probably the EU and China are presenting some of the most unique policy and regulatory challenges for companies. You know, in terms of how our companies are dealing with these challenges, you know, you mentioned, I think you said European protectionism. I will be clear that I'm not lobbing that accusation, but I do think we have seen some various regulatory proposals that could be said to have a protectionist element, right? I mean, there are multiple proposals regarding cloud computing, elements of the Data Governance Act, perhaps, potential data localization measures under the kind of the banner of digital sovereignty, and then also you've got consequential court judgments that companies are dealing with in Europe, such as the Schrems II ruling. So I mean, I think in terms of how companies are dealing with that set of challenges in Europe, a lot of the concerns boil down to kind of how do we ensure market access, and specifically, maintaining cross-border data flows and preventing data localization, number one, and then number two, really trying to focus on standards, on the development of international standards, and harmonization as opposed to country or region specific standards. I think if you look at China, it is a different set of concerns, but in some ways they are presenting some of the very same challenges for industry at a higher level. I mean, just a few of the concerning policies facing technology companies and others in China include kind of very, very broad and ambiguous security review regimes, forced partnerships in cloud services, China unique standards and standards development, and again, restrictions on cross-border data flows and data localization. So, I mean, in terms of how we companies are dealing with that set of challenges, as well, and I'll also answer the part of your question that dealt with the policy response here. Obviously, there is a significant policy response, particularly in the context of China, focused on kind of on that race metaphor that we were just talking about, and also national security. I think, companies certainly respect and understand the national security considerations of U.S. policymakers, and I think our perspective is really, how do we address those national security issues without jeopardizing, American innovation and competitiveness, and it's, and I think, and I know we will get more into this, in the context of artificial intelligence, is really where some of these challenges are most great. It is kind of this frontier technology that is really almost the poster child, as we might say, for the types of emerging technologies that hold great promise and also create significant potential national security and other concerns. I think what we've seen anyway so far in terms of a policy response with respect to China is relatively a continuation of Trump administration policies into the Biden administration on these topics. And I think in the European context, we've seen a little bit of a shift and really an increased desire and effort already at EU and US collaboration through things such as the EU-US Trade and Technology Council. So, I'm sure we'll get into more of these topics, but that's my initial response. Thanks.
Right, thank you. Now, Mr. Voss, of course, you're the politician here, and I think the political debate is somehow in Europe very much dominated by the notion of digital sovereignty, and that is ensuring Europe's digital sovereignty. How would you define digital sovereignty?
So thanks a lot for having me also to this event and to this discussion. Developing or defining digital sovereignty means at the end reducing dependencies. And here, of course, theoretically, we have to say creating our own algorithms. Algorithms made in Europe are the best way forward, but then it's getting more and more problematic. Of course, at first we have to join forces. Otherwise, I can't see that we really can catch up with the competition. Then, of course, we need this legal frame or ethical frame of how algorithms should be, and then having also in mind that these algorithms also, or the values integrated in algorithms should also be integrated in every algorithm who is having these products or services in Europe in place. But we are asking a lot, and here I hope this is not at the end ending in a kind of over-regulation, but we are asking then for, of course, being not discriminatory. It should be gender balanced or gender neutral. It should be environmentally friendly. It should be sustainable, privacy protecting, and so on. And this is, at first, I think, the frame that everyone knows in what frame you can develop AI made in Europe. Secondly, of course, speed is a big question right now. We have the question of investments, of skills. And if you have all these on board also in Europe, then you are coming to a kind of a really more digital sovereignty. But we have to think about also in creating sandboxes, because that's why we are asking so much then to get a kind of a best result out of it. You have to train. And so just to make sure that the result at the end is not infringing what we are considering as values. And also, probably it might be also a good parallel development if we taking also on or trying to take on the leadership in quantum computing. So this is something what we should have in mind. Of course, the thinking about chip production. So what I have heard from the Biden administration is also that they are improving the situation, also getting more independency from other states. And the idea is already in the European Union, but acting and making this work is a little bit more complicated in the EU of 27. So that's why we are aware of all of these, also hardware, software. Then you might come to a kind of a digital sovereignty, what we have in mind, but it needs a lot of different acting politicians right now, different behaviors in the European politics, but I hope we can manage it.
To be honest with you, I think also we need a different understanding and a more accurate understanding of technology, which is, in my opinion, if I may be frank, I think it's lacking a bit in the political space. I don't agree with you. We don't need European algorithms. Algorithms are just tools. It's like saying we need European-made knives. You can, of course, knives you can use to kill people, but you can also use to peel oranges. So it's not where the tool has been made, but rather what you made with that tool, what you're going to make with that tool. And this is something that is so dominating the European debate. I just cannot understand this focus on the origin of algorithms, the origin of programs, the origin of apps, of hardware. And just reducing digital sovereignty to the origin question is something I cannot fathom, honestly. I'm sorry, we need to move, of course, with the conversation, but could you please comment on this aspect?
Yes. So what I'm saying is not especially the origin, but the values in it. And this is something what we are preferring. And so that's why I think if we once have this in place, everyone should know how to approach also a European common market at the end with these algorithms. So the origin is not really the question, but if you're looking to the reality right now, we are not providing a lot of data right now because we have some restrictions in place. And that's why here we have to think, if we would like to compete, we need to be more open or find ways like what we have now with the Digital Governance Act and so on. But we need to find ways that also you can develop something in Europe and that you not have to go abroad to have AI in place or training it or whatever. So this is what I mean.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. We should be able to develop in Europe, but unfortunately, what Brussels is focusing on, and Berlin also, is just, defining more and more risky areas for artificial intelligence and for other technologies. It's more about limiting the use of technology than, promoting innovation. At least this is my perception, it's my personal opinion. But let's move on with the discussion. So, John, let's talk a bit about the United States. So the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence in the US has recently published a report on the geostrategic dimension of artificial intelligence. Technology regulation has become an integral part of the American political discourse. Could you elaborate on the steps that the United States and Congress, especially the administration, the steps that have been that they have been contemplating regarding AI?
Yes, happy to do that. And it does sound like you just heard from someone from the White House. So hopefully I'm not repeating some of what they said. But I guess the first point that I do want to make is that number one, that there has been, I think, relative stability on the administration front from the previous administration to the Biden administration on AI, and also on policies that, although maybe not directly regulating AI, potentially have very significant consequences for AI. And actually, it's not unrelated to the topic that you were just talking about regarding kind of the country of origin, if you will, of technologies, right? I mean, there's a particular focus. And has been a particular focus the past several years on secure and trusted information and communications technology, and in particular with respect to emerging technologies such as AI, and including supply chains. A lot of the focus there has been on the race with China, with potential major implications for U.S. national security and U.S. competitiveness. And the new administration really is viewing this as maintaining and extending U.S. leadership in technological innovation as a vital national security imperative, both in terms of the rising AI and digital technology competition with China, and in the broader sense, kind of viewed through a competitiveness lens of ensuring a U.S. leadership position in manufacturing, trade, and research and development. And there are areas where the policies, again, are continuing that have significant implications for AI, such as an executive order on the ICT supply chain, which was signed by the Trump administration and is being implemented by the Biden administration, which really has a somewhat striking breadth, candidly, and could impact AI, development and innovation. There is a new supply chain executive order as well that does something similar, and then we've also got kind of emerging technology export controls. So there's a lot of collateral areas of policymaking that can really continue to impact AI. We have seen a light touch regulatory approach from the administrations on artificial intelligence, in particular. An OMB memo on guidance for regulation of AI applications across the federal government takes a light touch approach. And then on the congressional side, we have just this week there was a bill introduced called the Endless Frontiers Act, which, amongst other things, really kind of embraces some of these very same concepts of the AI competition. And also is really trying to fund AI research and development in the U.S. Just to say a word on the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, since you mentioned it, I think that also is kind of, well, first of all, it's something that was created out of a congressional statute. A couple of years ago, the report just came out. It's mostly a private sector group, but again, it discusses the U.S. strategic competition with China, has key takeaways about how the U.S. government is not investing enough, and America is perhaps at risk from Chinese competition, and the immediate actions that they call for are increased leadership and a technology competitiveness council at the White House, talent and international workforce and skills development, hardware, in particular domestic semiconductor manufacturing, which is critical for AI, and then again, innovation and AI research and development. And I'll stop there.
Okay. Kristin, I have a question for you, but before that, do you want to comment on the discussion that's been going on?
Yes, I do want to also to challenge you back a little bit, Nabil, in good old discussion fashion. I mean, as Axel and I think also John rightly said, it's not, of course, about a culture or a national identity per se when we talk about the importance of the country of origin, but we do have, and John just mentioned that, very different legislations at place. And I do think we have to be clear that China is not a system with a rule of law, first and foremost, and that we have a couple of legislations which have extraterritorial reach, also potentially could even commercially kind of own companies could threaten them or could kind of nudge them to hand over data. And I think that's a risk that we have to take seriously, not from a over-protectionist point of view, but to just make sure that our critical infrastructure, in the same way as China addressed that issue, is kind of protected. And I think, therefore, European digital sovereignty or a focus on, for Europe to cooperate with what we call like-minded partners, liberal democracies, should be a priority. I think it's indeed a crucial security issue, also vis-a-vis our societies, by the way, right? Because technology obviously not only serves national interests, but national interests are societal interests, and it's a human-centered, first and foremost, approach in many ways.
Right, but I think this discussion should also be a technical discussion and not only a theoretical political discussion. So a lot of the things I hear, for example, about Huawei or other Chinese companies, the things that people expect those companies to be able to do with users' data, some of them are technically not possible. And this is something I'm missing in the debate. Generally, when it comes to AI or digitization, like the technical elements, having people who understand how these algorithms work, who understand the limits, the technical limits, the physical limit that cannot basically be overcome. Those people are not having, the weight they deserve in the policy debate. But let's move on with our conversation. We have so many questions, and the audience is also, they're also writing questions. So we talked about Europe and we talked about America, and Kristin, I'd like to ask you to elaborate on, how AI or digitization is moved forward in China. So I think a lot of people here believe that Beijing would issue an order and all companies and provinces would just follow slavishly. But of course, the situation is more complex. So could you please, in a nutshell, describe how the Chinese system works in this area?
Right. So, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Before also just to second you on that argument you just made, I think in vis-a-vis China, it's critically important to have an accurate understanding of the strength of China. And yeah, I'm happy to talk about that in a minute, but also about the weaknesses, right? We should not be afraid on the one end and say we have to cooperate with China, otherwise, we're lost. We should also be, but of course, we also should be aware of the strength. And I think that's something also we have underestimated for a long time, like the innovative capabilities and also the strategic planning and the interplay. I think that's at the very core, if I really have to put it in a nutshell, this nexus or ecosystem of how, of course, orchestrated by the party state, but of how commercial interests, startup, creativity, a super curious society are orchestrated by a party state to really kind of drive this digitalization quest at China. I think it's really a multi-level process we are seeing here. Also, of course, with tension and frictions, by the way, that we also know from Europe. For example, curious society, super fast adopters, that has always been seen as a strength in China, and it is a strength, clearly. But we also do have increasingly issues and lawsuits about personal data protection, for example. A super important topic also for IT developers in China. AI and ethics is a huge debate currently within the community. And I think there's also hope in that sense that we do see processes, and that's especially from a European point of view, where it might be also attractive for at least part of these Chinese ecosystem I've been talking about to look at, yes, innovation and fast standard setting, and but also it's not in conflict, and also from the Chinese point of view, at least from some people from private companies and citizens, also to have not over protected data, but to have securely protected data, for example. So but an accurate assessment of what's going on in China, where strength, where weaknesses, and where things we can look to, not to learn from them one-on-one or to do it the Chinese way. We should not do this. We should not try to become more Chinese than the Chinese, But clearly, also, as I said, this ecosystem, this orchestration. And one thing I think is also really remarkable, and we touched upon that, is this very active and fast moves the Chinese are doing in terms of standard setting, in standard setting organizations. I think that's, for example, is also an effort that especially Europe could also be more aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So it's a perfect segue for my next question for Mr. Voss, and it's kind of a heretical question. What can Europe learn from China? We always, this is something I said to David Cameron, by the way, so like 10 years ago, when he gave his keynote speech at Peking University. So I asked him, like, when political leaders come to China, they always try to lecture China on what China should do. But we never talk about, as you said, Kristin, so we should also talk about the strengths of China. We never talk about what we can learn from China. So what do you think, as a European policymaker, what could we and should we learn from China?
So regarding the digitalization, I would say what we can learn is setting priorities, having also a plan and a strategy for it, and providing all the money and not only infrastructure, also for developing digitalization and have a plan how to come to more data at the end. And they are, of course, have a lot of data, and this is how I would say between overprotecting data, making this very secure in Europe, and these totally no limits of getting data, what we also do not want, but there's a lot in between, and here we can, of course, get better. So being not fragmented also, this discussion from the morning till the evening and throughout over month, this is not helpful. We have to have a kind of a plan and a way forward, and not being too much fragmented, joining forces. And this is something more Europe related. And then speed. I still think speed is a real very important factor, and here we have to get a lot more better.
I agree with you. Yeah, we need, to get much better at speed, and also, maybe think twice or thrice before introducing new regulations that might just hinder, our innovative capacities. But now moving on in the last few minutes that we have like 5 minutes left, 4 minutes. Moving on to the challenges that face those three regions. If I would start with you, John, what do you think? What are the biggest challenges looking ahead that face American digital companies?
Well, thanks. I mean, actually, I think Axel just hit on it. In terms of fragmentation, and fragmented approaches, and not just globally, and that is a problem when we have potentially, from a global business standpoint, when you have divergent regulatory approaches or country-unique standards. I mean, it's very much a problem for technology development, right? But even just within the United States, I think it's fair to say if we look at potentially divergent regulatory approaches across different federal agencies, or, because again, AI is a horizontal technology. Everyone wants to use it, and it can touch any aspect of the economy, and thus many different regulators, authorities, right? Or even if we look at the US state level, including, not only potential state level AI regulations, but again, if you look at some other types of collateral regulation that could impact AI, whether we're talking about, supply chain or security regulation or export control regulation, or, even automated decision-making types of rules that we're now seeing at the US state level, and which obviously exist, for instance, in the GDPR as well. These types of things, if there is fragmentation and divergence, can also negatively impact innovation and companies. And then also just striking the right balance between these, competing very significant interests of national security, technology, and trade and economic considerations. AI is directly at the center of that conversation. And we're all working very, very hard in the technology industry to work with government partners everywhere, frankly, to try to get that balance right.
Mr. Voss, what are the biggest challenges facing Europe? And
what I would say, we are good in protection so far, but we are not really good in enabling. And this is how we should come forward. I'm totally agreeing with John in striking the right balance between the values and results. And we do not want to have these social scoring in place and so on. And therefore, also, I think international standards would be the right way forward. But so far, it seems that the interests are too divided, to split it so far. But this would be a good way forward, creating international standards and having a kind of a level playing field and fair play. So this would be good.
Mm-hmm. Kristin, you had the first word, and I'll happily give you the last words, since you were my former boss. So what do you think? So seriously, but if you look at China, what do you think? So what are the biggest challenges in the area of digitization and AI?
Well, clearly, on the international level, I would say for the Chinese government to mitigate, to manage the headwinds it got in terms of the United States, but also, of course, the European Union to some extent, because China also still is in key areas like chips, for example, still crucially dependent on foreign technology. To find that balance, it's a different balance than we've just talked about, but to, yes, push ahead and to claim international leadership, international markets, but on the other hand, not to kind of overdo it in the sense of, decoupling will take place much faster than the Chinese can build up their own, so to say, digital sovereignty or autonomy, which they're clearly aiming at. So that's one big challenge. Another one, an interesting one, is talents, top talents. Interestingly, there's a super center for data innovation in Brussels, an excellent think tank who has done extensive studies on comparing AI developments in the US, Europe, and China. And top talents, retainment and attraction is really a key issue that I also keep hearing from many Chinese experts. And that's also competition, of course. Again, technology is, yes, it's about technical issues, Nabil, I agree, but it's also about people. And in that sense, it's great to have been able to discuss with all of you about these issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. So we have to take society with us. I agree. Otherwise, they wouldn't use technology. It's not, an aim in itself. So I agree with you totally on that point. And I'm happy we found agreement on something. But so thank you very much for this very interesting conversation. I think it's like dealing with China and also for us in Europe, promoting artificial intelligence and other digitization technologies, and also for the US, keeping the current level of technological developments. These are some of the challenges that face policymakers in the respective region, and this will continue to be the case for years to come. So thank you very much.